Hi and welcome to this bonus class on laser cut felt. I'm Sarah and I want to thank you for purchasing the All Access Pass. I hope you enjoyed the beginner workshop on how to laser cut a barn quilt from felt. Today we're going to be making this tissue box cover. You can grab the SVG to follow along for this particular design, but if you want to personalize it with your own design, I'll show you the step-by-step process for working with laser cut felt to create your own SVG file. I'll start the design process in Procreate, then I have a quick and easy hack to vectorize your file before creating the final SVG in Illustrator and cutting it on the laser.
Color outside the lines.
Everyone's tissue boxes are going to be different, so you're going to have to measure your own and create your own SVG. So the important measurements, of course, are along the top here. Now this one is 8 7/8, so we're going to go ahead and write that down, but then when we come to do the Illustrator file, as you'll see later, we're going to add 1/8 of an inch just for a little bit of ease, and we're going to make that 9. Then we're going to go ahead and turn it around, and we're going to check the width. And again, that's 4 3/4. We're going to add 1/8, and so that's going to be 4 7/8. Then you're going to measure the height. This is 2 3/4, and we are going to leave that 2 3/4 when we come to do the Illustrator file. So write down all your measurements. Let's move on to Procreate for now, but later on I'll show you how to design this in Illustrator. I like to draw my artwork in Procreate, and that's because it's just so flexible. I can add layers or I can duplicate layers, and now that I've drawn my artwork, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to duplicate this layer, and now I can go ahead and color it in. So I can choose my first color and just drag it right over to the canvas here and drop it right in place. This is going to act as my reference drawing, and that way I'll be able to tell which colors to split out for various colors of felt. If you find that it's too small, just take 2 fingers and drag them out, and you'll be able to enlarge your artwork. And if at any point you fill accidentally, you can just hit 2 fingers on the pad and you'll back right out of that. Once you're done coloring in, you can export this for reference for later. So we're just going to hit this little wrench. We're going to save it as a PNG and save it to our photos, and then we can use that as a reference. Now, there are some lines on here that we're not going to need because we're going to go ahead and applique those. So let's go back to our original artwork. Since we're appliquing this, there could be some lines on here that you don't necessarily need because you're going to be stitching them. So for instance, this line here that delineates one of the doors. So we can just click on our eraser tool here, and we can go right ahead and just erase that. So let me just uncheck this so that we can see what we're doing, because I've got a duplicate layer here, and we can continue erasing that. Now, if you need to zoom in, you can take 2 fingers and just move them outwards. Pinch in and pinch out to make it bigger or smaller. And then we can go ahead and erase that line. I'm going to make that a little bit smaller so we can snug this up. And there you go. This one is ready to export too. Now, I could choose to also erase these lines here, but I can also do that in Illustrator later. So for now, let's just export that. We're going to select Share, and we're going to export it as a PNG, and then save it as a photo. Our next step is going to be to vectorize this artwork. We're going to take it into Inkscape to vectorize it. And this is a hack that you can do with any single score line artwork that you want to do. So it'll come in handy not only for felt cutting, but for any single score artwork. So let's move on to Inkscape and I'll show you how to do it. Here we are in Inkscape, and I've got my artwork open, and I'm going to select it. Then I'm going to right click, and we want to trace bitmap. Now the default option is brightness cutoff, but we're not going to use that today. We're going to go into centerline tracing. And then we're going to apply it. I'm going to keep all the defaults because it works perfectly well. So let's apply that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to drag that away. We can delete our original artwork because we no longer need it. And let's drag this back onto the canvas. Now I'm going to hold my Control key. I'm on a Mac, and I'm going to swipe on my mouse so that I can enlarge it. And we're going to zoom in because, as is usually the case with this particular kind of vectorizing, you end up with gaps here, as you can see, and we want to close those gaps. So we're going to select the second arrow here, and that's so that we can see these nodes, and we're just going to move these onto the path so that they're closed. Now you might have to go back and forth so that you can see what you're doing. So let's select this one, move it over, and up here. I'm just going to continue doing this until all these gaps are closed. The alternative is to redraw this so that you get this single score line. But if you have to redraw this entire thing in Illustrator or another program, it can take a long time, and I do think that this is a shortcut. So give it a go, try it out, and see if this works for you. So if there's anything that is a little wonky here, you can actually delete nodes if you don't need them to straighten that out. Or you can move them and just straighten them that way. I'm going to continue this, and when we're back, we're going to be ready to create our SVG to export, and then we're going to bring it into Illustrator. Once your artwork is all cleaned up, you're going to export the drawing as an SVG. So let's click off of this. Let's select the whole thing. Let's come up here to File, Export. We want to change this to a plain SVG, and let's go ahead and save that. I'm going to change this VW for Illustrator so that we know that this SVG still has to be finessed. And let's save that. The next step is to colorize and break apart the pieces in Illustrator so it can be cut on the laser and applicate together on the tissue box cover. So let's move on to Illustrator. To create the tissue box cover, you're going to need to write down your measurements. So I started off with 8 7/8 by 4 3/4. So what I end up with is 9 by 4.875, which includes 1/8 of an inch ease. My sides are 2 3/4 high. Now this might not make sense now, but let's draw it and I'll explain as we go. So we're going to click on our rectangle tool here, and we're just going to draw our rectangle. We're going to go into our transform panel, and we're going to enter our top measurements, which is 9 by 4.875. So there's our center section. Now we have to add on our sides. So let's draw another rectangle. I'm just going to draw it up here, but we will drag it down. Now we're going back into our transform panel, and our height is 2.75. Our length is going to be 9 inches. Now we can take this and we can just connect it here. So that's the side that folds down. We're going to take this and duplicate it, Control C, Control V, and we're going to pop it onto the other side here. Now what's left is the sides for the right and left. So again, we're going to draw our rectangle, come into our transform panel. Our height again is consistent, so it's 2.75. And then our width has to match the end here. So we're going to enter 4.875. So now we have to rotate it, so we're going to hit our move tool here. If you hover over a corner, you'll get a circular arrow that you can then rotate. And if you hold down your shift key as you rotate, you'll be able to get a perfect 90-degree rotation. Now we can move it here, make sure it connects properly. You want it to intersect that line. Now if you do Alt-Shift, You can copy it right over to the other side and intersect it there. Now you're not quite finished yet because you have to add some seam allowance here and here so you can stitch it up. So onto this one, we're going to come back up to the transform, and instead of 9 inches, it's going to be 9.25 because we want an 1/8 and an 1/8 either side. So as you can see, that has grown. We're going to do the same thing on this side. Now, if you want, you can do this at the very beginning and calculate it, but I just want to demonstrate that you do have to add a seam allowance in so you can stitch it. So 9.25. Now you have to do the same over here because you need some seam allowance on this side to be able to stitch it to here. So let's hit the transform again, and you're going to be adding it onto the height, which is this. So you're going to take your 4.875 and you're going to add 0.25. That's an 1/8 and an 1/8 for each end. That gives you 5.125. As you can see, that has grown too. So we're going to do the same thing to the other side, 5.125. Now that you've got all your seam allowance, you're going to select everything, and then you're going to come up to your Pathfinder tool, and you're going to click Unite. That's going to give you your finished pattern. So we can move this up here, and now what you're going to do is you're going to save this as your source file, and I've already saved my source file here. You're going to take this and copy it. You're going to create a new file, and you're going to paste it. Then you're going to save it, tissue box felt cover, and I'll save it. Before you finalize this and save this as an SVG, you're going to select your circle tool here, and it's underneath the rectangle. You want your ellipse tool, and you're going to measure the opening in your tissue box, and I think around 5 inches by 1.5 inches should be sufficient. So I'm just going to drag this out. You can come up to your transform tool if you want it to be precise. Your measurement may differ, so be sure to measure your own particular tissue box. Now what you're going to do is select both of these, and you're going to want to center them both horizontally and vertically. If you go into align here, you want to make sure you're aligning to your selection, and that's looking pretty good. So from here, you're going to save it as an SVG. Now I previously saved this, so I'm just going to overwrite it. And there you go. This is ready to cut. So I'm going to be cutting this out of gray felt, and I'll show you how to do that when we're ready to cut this out on the P2 laser. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to place my original artwork so that I can scale it right here. So we're going to move to that next. Once you have the dimensions of your tissue box, you're going to place your SVG artwork that we just exported from Inkscape onto the canvas, and then we're going to scale it to size. As you can see, it comes in fairly small, but the beauty of a vector is that you can scale it to any size without losing quality. So we're just going to scale it up to fit the space. Then if you want, you can even stretch it if you think it's going to look good. And I think this looks fine. As you can see here, I'm wrapping a little bit over the top because the side of my tissue box is just a little bit too narrow, so it doesn't hurt to do that. Now, if you want to mirror the image and have it on both sides, you can drag it over there, and to mirror image it, we're going to select Object, Transform, and Reflect. Then you can reflect both vertically and horizontally to flip it the way you want it. You can actually choose to put the artwork on only one side or both sides. It's up to you. So now that this is scaled, you can go ahead and copy this now, and we're going to create a new file. So we're going to copy it into a new file here, and don't forget to go ahead and save that as your source file. I'm not doing that quite yet. For now, I'm just going to drag the artwork up to the left-hand side here, and I'm going to create a compound path. That's Control-8 on the keyboard. From there, I'm going to select my Live Paint tool, and that's K on the keyboard if you want to do the shortcut. I'm going to hover over the bus here and then click. That will allow me to segment all these different sections so that I can then color them to cut on the respective colors of felt. Let's grab that reference sketch we did earlier in Procreate so that we know what colors we want to use. We're going to place the artwork onto the canvas, and then we're going to make it just a little larger so we can see what we're doing. Grab your Life Paint tool and go into the palette, and now we're just going to colorize each individual section according to our reference. So go ahead and do that. Once we're done, we're going to move on to next steps, and that's separating all the pieces out. We're finished with our color reference, so we can go ahead and delete that. And now we're going to break this apart. But before we do that, some of these lines are stitching lines. They're not cut lines, so I'm going to go ahead and delete those. And then I'm going to have like a reference picture for later that I can refer back to when it comes to stitch this. So I'm going to go ahead and delete, and now we're going to move on. We're going to select everything on the canvas. Then we're going to go up to Object, Expand, and then we're going to click OK. Now, before you click off, go back to Object and then ungroup it. Now we're going to be able to separate the lines from the sections. So what we want to do is highlight those lines and drag it off to the right-hand side here. You can take it off the canvas completely because we no longer need that. It's time to focus on separating out the like colors. First, we're going to ungroup everything once again. And now we can select one of the colors, in this case the orange, go up to Select, Same, and then Fill Color. That will select everything that's orange, and we can drag that down into a new section of the canvas. I'm going to back up a moment here and reverse that, because what I want to do is I want to copy this entire artwork, and I want to copy it into a new file and save it as a colored version of the bus. Now that's just in case I ever want to refer back to it before I start breaking it apart. It's always good to save your work as you go and have copies that you can refer back to. So that's what I'm doing here. Save and close that, and then we're going to go back to our other file, and I'm just realizing at this point that I haven't saved it, so we're going to go ahead and save that as our source file. We're back on track, so I'm going to show you once again how to select the orange all at once. Now that it's separated, we're going to scooch it in close because we want to save on our material here. We don't want to waste our felt. So go ahead and stack them fairly close together, but not too close. You don't want any overlap. And we are going to apply some kerf a little later, which will make these pieces bigger. So do ensure that they're not too close together. Now we're going to move on to our next color, which is red. We're going to do exactly the same thing. However, before we move on with breaking apart the red, I'm noticing that there is a bunch of little pieces that we can ideally merge together and just separate out with our embroidery further ahead when we come to sew this. There's really no need to have a bunch of tiny pieces that we have to fit back together unless that's what you want to do. I mean, you can do it either way. Combine them and then delineate it with the embroidery, or leave them separate and you're still going to be stitching them together regardless. So I'll leave that up to you. Again, we're going to stack the pieces closely together so we can save on our felt. Now we're going to separate out the blue and the white and the remaining colors. Just to recap, select the color you want to move, go up to Select, Same, Fill Color, and then you can drag everything down at once. It's a real time saver. So let's just quickly go through this part, and feel free to combine some of the smaller pieces as I showed you before with the red. Just a reminder to save your work as you go. Adding kerf is a two-step process. First, you're going to select everything and give it a black stroke. Now you're going to come up to Object, Path, Offset Path, and you're going to enter a number that represents your kerf. So I'm going to cut away to how you can actually find your kerf so that you have an understanding of this. Finding your kerf is really easy with just one tool. We're going to use these electronic calipers. So we've gone ahead and cut a 1-inch square out of our felt here. We're just going to get the calipers going, set it to 0, and let's just move this out of the way. We're going to measure what we have left from our 1-inch square. You don't want to squish it, you just want to have it fairly snug. So it's a bit tricky with felt. I feel like that's a good measurement, 0.988. So our next step is to get out the calculator And let's just get this going. So we're going to punch in our 0.988. We're going to subtract the original 1 inch that we started with, and let's see what that gives us. That's 0.012. Then we're going to divide that in 2, because every time you cut something, there's both sides of the line. So you want to give some equal kerf to each side of your piece. So let's divide that by 2, and that equals 0.006. So that's going to be our kerf that we add back into the pieces that we are designing. So go ahead and add 0.006 into the offset path. I made a mistake here and did 0.003, but I did correct that later, so just ignore that and just enter the number that represents your kerf. Now before you click away, what you want to do is you want to add a yellow stroke. And that's so you can differentiate between the black line that you added earlier and what your kerf is. If you go ahead and you delete the black stroke, that's going to leave just your yellow kerf, as you can see here. And that's exactly what you want. You want your bigger piece to remain. So we're going to use the same trick that we used previously, and that is to select the same color pieces. I'll correct that overlap in a moment, but I'll just show you that you want to select any piece here. Then you're going to go back up to select, same, but this time you're going to click stroke color, not the fill. That's going to select all your black lines so that you can then delete them, leaving you with just your kerf pieces. It's a quick way of doing it, and there you go, you've got your kerf. I'll just zoom in and show you that all the stroke colors are now yellow. Now let's drag that piece so that it's not overlapping, and we're ready to save this as an SVG. To save as an SVG, I'm going to select everything in the source file, I'm going to copy it, then I'm going to open up a new file and I'm going to save it in that separate file. I don't want to touch my source file. I typically like to leave it as is because that is my source. So I'm going to save as, and I'm going to save as an SVG and give it a new name. Let's call this VW Bus Tissue Box to Cut and go ahead and save that. By the way, if you make this project or any felt project, we'd love to see it. Tag us at Birds of a Feather. We're not quite finished with this SVG. There's still a little bit of work to do. First, we're going to select everything again, and we're going to give it a black stroke. And the reason we do that is because these pieces are going to have a cut function. Now, your laser may be different. I'm using an Xtool P2, but I find that when I import this into the Xtool LCF software before I go to cut it, all my colors disappear. All I can see is the black line. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to give everything a name that coincides with the color. Don't forget to expand the text. What you want to do is you want to select the text, and then you're going to go up to type and create outlines. If you forget that extra step, the color names won't show up when you port the file into the Xtool LCF software. And I'm not doing it here because I actually forgot. So it's a time-saving step if you do this now. You can do it once you import it, but I do find that the software is a little bit clunky. It's so much easier to do it while you have it here in Illustrator. Here we are in Xtool Creative Space, and I've imported my SVG. All you do is you go into this file icon here, import image, and you bring it onto the canvas. As you can see, we've lost our color here, so it's a good thing that we took the time to write these colors in so that we can tell which color of felt we want to print on. Before I get too busy, I'm going to select everything that I want to cut. As I'm doing this, I'm holding down the Shift key and I'm dragging to select. You'll notice that I'm avoiding the words, and that's because we're not going to cut those, so we don't need to assign a processing to them. They're going to be dragged right off of the canvas in the next step. I'm going to come here into processing type and I'm going to click on cut. That's going to tell the software that these black lines are to be cut. As an extra precaution, sometimes if I have multiple layers, I'll just come down into the layer panel here and I'll just type cut or whatever the actual processing type happens to be. That's just so that I can keep it all straight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down my control key and swipe on the mouse to minimize this. I'm going to select everything and then I can drag it right off of the canvas. And that's because I'm going to bring it back one by one. So let's start with the white. and drag it over here. And now what I'm going to do is, with this selected, I'm going to come into the top panel here, and first of all, I'm going to group it. Now with it still selected, I'm going to come up here again into the Combine option, and I'm going to click Unite. And what that does is it saves you time on the processing of the laser. So for instance, if I didn't unite this, the laser might start cutting in a zigzag pattern, up and down, every which way it wants. When you unite it, it typically starts very methodically from top to bottom. That saves a lot of time in the processing. So I always do this step. You can also do this step in Illustrator, but I like to do it here in the LCF software. So from here, we're going to connect our device, and then we're gonna do our settings. Whenever I'm cutting felt, I always insert the honeycomb panel. That's because it keeps the felt nice and flat. Let's just start with our white felt. We've got these magnetic clips, and these are great for holding your material down. So we're just going to clip this into place. So let's go ahead and close our lid. Let's connect the device and get cutting. So we've got our artwork highlighted. Let's go into settings. I've already got a setting for felt abstract art, so I'm going to select that. It's going to give me a power of 6 and a speed of 10. Depending on the thickness of your felt, your settings might be completely different, so please do your own experimentation with that to find your own setting. Let's click off and put our thickness in. To do the thickness, you have to put a 0 before your decimal point, so 0.096 is the thickness. I always manually input my thickness because I like to measure with calipers. We can place it really anywhere we want. So let's just snug it up right here. Okay, so I'm going to get my fan going, and then we're going to hit process, and then we're going to cut this. I've got my inline fan on now, so let's get cutting. Let's hit process. And we'll hit the start button, and then we're going to go over to the P2 and hit the button on the machine itself. Let's hit the start button. My felt settings tend to be set at low speed, but you can increase the speed if you like. You'll just have to finesse your own settings. So this is real time. I'm going to speed it up so that we can see how it looks when it's done. And here it is. Let's open it up and see it. It looks amazing. You get precise, crisp lines. I just love how the Xtool P2 handles felt. So let's remove our magnetic clips, and then we're going to place our next color onto the honeycomb panel and continue cutting. Once you're done cutting, you can see here the time that we used in cutting that. We're going to press OK. Now we've come back to our screen here, and we can take this right off because we're done with it, and we can bring the next piece back. Let's do the blue this time. We're going to get it onto the canvas. We've loaded the blue into the Xtool P2, and now we're ready to cut that also. So let's close the lid and get cutting. Now that the felt is in the machine, what we're going to do here is we're going to refresh the screen. As you can see, we've got the blue felt here. So let's just move that over here. And if you want to be sure you've got it on the felt, you can capture close view. This time we're going to do this side. And you can hold down your control key and zoom right in. And you can move it fairly close. It allows you to get a lot of precision, so I just absolutely love this capture close view feature. So again, we're going to give it a processing type of cut. We're going to go into our manual settings here, and we're going to choose Felt Abstract Art. We're going to click off, and we've got our thickness already established here, which is great. So let's hit process again, and let's hit start, and now we're ready to press the button. I just want to mention that you should not leave your device unattended when it's working, so I'm going to stand over this and watch it for as long as it takes to cut all of these. Let's go ahead and cut the blue. Look how amazing that close view camera is. Let's take a closer look. The close view camera got exactly where we positioned it. It's just another amazing feature in the Xtool XES software. Before moving on to other colors, let's just see if the kerf worked out. That way we're not going to waste material if we've made an error. I'm just going to remove this. I'm going to come over to the blue. Let's just see if it fits. Like a glove. It worked. It's a perfect fit. It's nice and tight. There's no gaps. Let's see if I can zoom in to show you. It fits there no problem. As you can see, when it's cut right here, the laser does leave a gap. But because we cut these with kerf, there's no gap in the blue felt. So that's why you want to do your kerf, so that you don't get those unsightly gaps in your finished artwork. Once you're finished cutting all your colors of felt, you can actually save this file as an XES file so that you have it if you ever want to do this project again. Now you may have noticed that we only cut out one version of our artwork, but you can also create a mirror image in the XES software so that you can applicate it on both sides of this gray tissue box cover. If you wanted to do this so that it's on both sides of the tissue box, you could come up to Reflect and reflect horizontally. And now you've got for both sides right here. So you could do the same with the blue. Copy and paste. And reflect it horizontally. And now you've got the blue. So you can do the same thing with the rest of these and reflect them. There. Now you've got duplicates of everything. So let's go ahead and save that again. Now that the felt is all cut out, we can start our assembly. And we're just going to lift out any pieces. And if you find that some of the pieces are sticking together because it is a synthetic and it does tend to melt, some of these fibers just want to hold on. So just take a sharp X-Acto knife and just like carefully cut those away. And quite honestly, it's just barely a thread. So you shouldn't have to apply too much force to get it out of here. And there you go, this one is ready to assemble on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to applique my design on one of the sides here, and then we're going to be able to take this to the sewing machine, and we're just going to stitch up the edges with that 1/8 of an inch seam allowance here. So we're going to end up with our box. We can literally remove the pieces now and start our assembly. Just popping in the colors here. And look how beautifully these pop together, because we got the kerf and we took the time to figure that out. And again, if there are just a few threads hanging on that are just stubborn, just take your sharp blade and just gently tear them away. Now don't lose some of these smaller pieces because we're going to need those for later, so don't throw anything away until you're sure that you've got everything that you need. almost like putting together a puzzle here. Now you may just want to refer back to your original design so that you can see how this all fits together. I believe this pops in here, and that pops right in there. And then it all gets appliqued so that those lines are delineated. Now if you didn't want to applique this, you could just get a double-face fusible and you could just fuse it right onto your gray felt. You won't get the delineation of those black lines, which can look really smart. So here's the start. I'm going to be assembling the rest of this off camera, and when we're back, you're going to see the final reveal. Here it is, all stitched together. Now that you know how to work with felt, you can design anything you like. I hope you found this tutorial useful. At Birds of a Feather, we're feathering the nest one project at a time. We not only do laser projects, but we do upcycles, crafts, and more. Thanks for watching. For more unique project ideas, subscribe and follow. Want more unique crafts and DIYs? Be sure to watch another video.